one of my favorite strategies, and I know one of yours and one of your students' favorite strategies, is agreements for sale, Barry. And again, a very profitable strategy, a very doable strategy. You can get in with no money down. You can be really light in all of it. So talk to me about what the heck is an agreement for sale?
I have publications called "What the Heck is an Agreement for Sale?" That's what people say to me. What the heck is it? So an agreement for sale at its heart, is a seller financing strategy. It's a seller financing strategy. Here's how it goes. A seller wants to sell his property, and for various reasons, it really breaks down into two areas, Patrick. Sellers who have difficulties, sellers who are in trouble. So in that category, it's kind of the same as when we were speaking about wholesaling and rent to own, is that sellers get into divorces. All of a sudden, they can't afford the house they were in that took two incomes to support because they're divorced and they only have one income each. Sellers lose their jobs. Sellers get transferred. Sellers have all kinds of problems that they cannot solve. And here's the classic no money down scenario. So we have our $400,000 house. So seller bought, paid $400,000. In this case, he got a 95% CMHC mortgage. That's 5% down. That means he got a mortgage for $380,000, which when you add CMHC fees on it is probably up to about $388, something like that. Now the market twitches. Let's just say it twitches 5% down. So his $400,000 property is now only worth $380,000 and his mortgage is $388. And his boss says, "You're moving to Calgary next week. Sorry, we don't pay your moving costs." So he's got to sell his house. A spouse says, "You know what? Sorry, we've got to get divorced." And that's going to happen soon. The boss says, "You've lost your job," and he has payments to make. So in all of those scenarios, sellers are going, "What the heck am I going to do?" And the first thing they do is they call their friendly realtor who maybe helped them buy the house. And they go, "Okay, here's what's happened to me. I've got to sell." Long silence from the realtor because he knows the numbers. Long silence. And then he goes, "Okay, sorry to have to tell you this, but your house is worth $380 right now. Your mortgage is $388. If you sell this property and pay out your mortgage, you're going to have at the minimum a 3-month interest payment penalty. And that's going to be, in your case, say $5,000. Now, you do know I'm a realtor and I get paid on commission. And then on a $400,000 sale, commission would be $16,800. $16,800 plus payout of $5,000 minimum. We're up to, say, $22,000, $21,800. And the realtor goes, "Okay." And that's not counting the fact that if the house is worth $380, we're not going to get an offer for $380. We're going to get one for $360 and settle at $370. Are you ready to stroke a check for about $22,000 in order to sell your house? Ouch. And no, the seller isn't ready to do that. So stress building for him. He's, feels the burden of this giant mortgage millstone around his neck. It's more and more stressful. And so as an AFS investor, as a problem solver, as someone who's located this seller from whatever marketing you do, you come along and you say to the seller, after you've established some rapport, "I'm really sorry that you're in this circumstance, but would it help you if I took over your mortgage payments, took over your taxes, took over your insurance on the property, and I will take over responsibility for all the maintenance and all the other expenses of the property. Would that work for you?" What does the seller say? "Yeah, that would work for me." All of a sudden, you've lifted the stress of foreclosure that's looming, where his credit will be ruined for 7 years. You've taken over the all of the angst and agony that they're facing when any of those job loss, divorce, transfer things come into the picture. Now, as an AFS buyer, you have to accomplish your usual diligence. You have to be able to see that this property works for you. It's got to work for you as an investment property because you want to add it to your portfolio and all the maintenance on the property. If I could do that for you, would that work for you? Would that work for you? And folks, the answer to the question is almost always yes in the circumstances that we've been talking about. You've got a seller who has not been sleeping at night. He sees his credit being ruined. He's tried to sell with a realtor. He has got nowhere to go and no one to turn to. And now you have come along and solved his problem. Solved his problem. I, Something else that often happens in these circumstances is that a seller does actually write you a check to take over the property. Sometimes the numbers work out that the place really is only worth $370,000 and the mortgage is $388, and you go, I can't take over a property 370 with a mortgage of 388 on it. And as much as you'd like to not have a seller have to give you a check, sometimes they do. So that is what an AFS buyer says to a seller after analysis. And so you want to know in making those offers that this is a deal that will work. So if it's a property that you want to put into your own portfolio, then your diligence should have said to you that this is going to be a positive cash flow or at least a neutral cash flow situation for me. Occasionally people go, well, if I had bought it, I would have had to put up 40 grand or 80 grand, sorry, 80 grand if I did 20% down. So if it's negative a couple of $100 a month, let me see, a couple $100 a month, how long am I going to hold it? That's $2,400 a year. I think I might have to hold it for 5 years before the market turns around. So I have to put up 10 grand over 5 years instead of 80 grand for a deposit. So even if it's negative, depending on what your plans are for the property, it can be a home run for you. That's
And
putting it in your own portfolio, and you have other AFS. You can exit an AFS through other creative strategies as well.
And let's not step over. So when the whole concept of an agreement for sale is that you're solving somebody else's problem. They've got to get out of a property. You're that person that's going to step in and take over the property. And the thing about this is that they've got an existing mortgage on it. Now that's really the kind of the key to all of this. So if you're in that position as an investor where you're light on a down payment and or you don't qualify for a mortgage, this is a way to actually build your portfolio. And I mean, you can incorporate all sorts of, in this case, you could be the wholesaler on these deals too, but different, more complex part of it. But you're really moving in and taking over that existing mortgage. So you're not qualifying for a mortgage. That's part of the agreement, which is to say, you're going to, Mr. Seller, you're going to actually continue to carry the mortgage in your name. The property title remains in your name. However, we have this agreement for sale that says that I'm responsible for all of these things. And I don't want to minimize the importance of making sure that's written up the right way, that the seller has actually had a lawyer's guidance, and we can talk about that briefly. But that really is the most powerful, or one of the most powerful parts of the strategy, is it not, Barry?
Yes, you've summarized it nicely. You add up between the buyer and the seller. They add up what the mortgage payment might be, what the taxes are, what the insurance are, what any other payments are, and they set up a joint bank account. The buyer deposits the amount of those payments into the account every month, and then it flows through to the seller, and his mortgage payment, tax payment, insurance payment all get made. So that is the scenario where the value of the property is near the value of the mortgage. We call that the low equity, no equity version of the AFS. You can also do an AFS where the seller is not in trouble, where a seller has a clear title property. That's a different scenario. And why would a seller Why would a seller who has a clear title property want to be your bank? Because really, seller financing. Well, the seller sometimes can get a premium price from a buyer. He wants 400,000 because it was worth 400,000. It's only worth 385 now in the marketplace, but it was worth 400 once, and gall darn it, he wants 400, not settling for any less. So a buyer can pay a $15,000 premium if the property still works for him. Sellers can leverage an interest rate. I mean, maybe the seller's got a mortgage of $100,000 at 1.9%, and he sells to the buyer and carries the loan of our $400,000 purchase. We put up 25 grand, $375,000 loan from the seller at 3.9%. So the seller's collecting 3.9% on 375,000. He's only paying a mortgage of 100,000 at 1.9. So there's cash flow for a seller. It helps him defer taxes. It helps him get rid of a property that maybe he was renting, and he doesn't want the difficulty of renting anymore. So he can defer some taxes for up to 5 years. So there is also a whole other style of agreement for sale where the seller has maybe a ton of equity. So it works. It works on both ends of the what's the seller got into the game style of transactions.
And if an investor is listening to this, this is also a great exit strategy, or can be a great exit strategy for some properties by the investor. To your point, tax consequences and deferring taxes aside, it is just a great way to sometimes exit a property in maybe a bad market time, or where the market timing is not. It does not line up with you, but you need to get out of that deal for all the reasons, and you don't necessarily want to disturb the tenant either. It's an opportunity to have that property continue to be rented. You just want to get rid of whatever the problem is, for whatever that looks like, whatever your stress point is, and then move on. So it's a great way to exit as well.
Yeah, it's a very adaptable strategy, and it is not quite as well known across the country as wholesaling and rent to own, but it is becoming better known, and it is especially becoming better known in Ontario, where we've got 3 different sets of lawyers who want to come to our next event in Ontario to learn about agreements for sale. After we did our most recent event here in Edmonton, some Ontario attendees went back to Ontario and purchased multi-million-dollar triplexes using the agreement for sale technique, and did not put in a dime of their own money. Not a dime of their own money.
Well, how's that even possible? Give me a little bit more about that story, Barry.
Sure.
That's fantastic. And we know that those deals happen, but give me just a little bit more on that particular scenario.
Okay. Our student had a relationship with a pretty successful plugged-in realtor who brought a property to him and said, listen, this guy is a builder. He's building this triplex. There's a potential for a suite in the basement. But he's run into economic troubles, and we're in Ontario now, and the downdraft in the market has caught this builder. And so for various reasons, he wants to exit this triplex that he's building. So here's what he's got. He's got a mortgage on the property of, I believe, $1.3 million. He's got a line of credit on the property for $400,000. And he's getting nibbles from buyers at 1.6, 1.65. He thinks the property's worth about $2.5 million. So realtor and student went at this a couple of different ways, and it just, it wasn't working out. The realtor goes, hey, I got to be paid out of this. The seller goes, I need some money. Our student goes, I'm putting this together for people and I want to get paid. So long story short, what they ended up doing was they set up an agreement for sale based on a price of $2.5 million, 1.3 worth of existing mortgage, $400,000 worth of existing HELOC, line of credit. They put a $200,000 second mortgage on the property, which the bank allowed because I'll just tell you why in a minute. And the seller says, on top of all of that, I will be your bank for the remaining $400,000 that's going to be due in, I think it was 4 months. Going to be due in 4 months. You go, whoa! As you know, Patrick, most agreements for sale have much longer terms than that before they mature and before you'd have to pay the seller. But here's what was going on with this property. That proposed suite in the basement became, with Doug Ford's push to have more housing. I mean, what does he want to build? 1.5 million units over the next X number of years?
Sure.
Greenbelt be damned. The suite in the basement became an approved suite. All of a sudden, that ratcheted the cash flow through the roof to the point where this property is likely worth about $3.2 million.
Wow.
So 1.3, 400 HELOC, 200 by way of a second mortgage on the house, and 400 carried by the seller is all the money that's there. That paid the realtor, that gave our client some money for setting up the deal. And essentially, he didn't have to take a penny out of his pocket. Buys for 2.5, a property that is now worth 3.2, and they're finishing up renovations now. It'll be rented for the 1st of April. And so he'll definitely be able to pay the seller within the 4-month time frame with maybe a small extension. And then, are you ready? He went and did exactly the same deal with almost exactly the same numbers with a different builder who was caught in the same circumstance.
Wow.
So
That's amazing.
that's Ontario.